Hi friends, welcome back to Mini Monet's Art for the Young. Today our tutorial is going to be an Easter Spring Eeyore. And for this piece, you can use any type of watercolor paper or any regular paper. You can use crayons, you can use colored pencils, markers, you can use watercolors like I did, or you could even use acrylics and a canvas. But I'm going to show you step by step how to sketch Eeyore and how to watercolor paint him if that's what you're choosing to do today. So I brought for you today another image for you to see. This is my daughter's piece that she started, and this is kind of the progression that she's at. So that way you can see what a 7-year-old's piece will also look like compared to an adult's piece. So if you are doing watercolors today like I am, there's a few things you're going to need. The first thing that you will need is a nice cardstock piece of watercolor paper. I really like to use a high quality watercolor paper because it helps absorb all the paint really nicely. The second thing that you'll need is a nice sharp pencil with an eraser. You'll also need a Sharpie. You can use either a fine tip or an ultra fine tip. You will also need a paper towel to be able to kind of test out some of those colors, or in case you need to blot anything off. You'll need a jar for your water and a good variety of brushes to use, small bristled as well as the large. And you will also need a watercolor palette with a nice variety of shades. Okay, so we're going to get started and we're going to zoom in so you can see the step-by-step sketching first. Okay, so we're going to turn you over to my easel here. We're going to zoom you in just a little bit just so that you can see nice and clear. And we're going to tape our Eeyore right next to you so you can see both of our papers here. Okay, so the first thing you need to remember is that your piece will not look just like mine. So you want to make sure you keep that in mind. Your piece needs to look like yours. So if you decide to make your Eeyore smaller or make him bigger, that's fine. You can do him without rabbit ears or with ears. You can change your basket, eggs, all of it. So keep in mind, have fun being you. Things don't need to be exactly the same. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to find the middle of my paper here, and I'm just going to say this is pretty much the middle, and then I'm going to scoot over just a little bit. Now, we're going to start with the shape of his face here. So you can see this almost looks like the shape of a U. So when I start, I'm going to start down just a little bit, and I'm going to start to come down. It's going to be a nice shape of a U. Drop it around, and it's going to start to come back up like so. Don't worry about it having to be exactly perfect or exactly rounded. His face is sort of tilted and shifted a little bit anyway, so have fun with it. Okay, so the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to create his big, long, droopy ears before we start to get into those facial features. So we're gonna go way up here, so not connecting here, but coming up just a bit. And we're gonna do a nice big side smile. And remember, he's got those big donkey ears. They're kind of like big puppy ears, so they're gonna really come and drop down. You can see this sort of looks like a nice big side smile or even a stretched out C. The ears are gonna come flop around and they're gonna come curve all the way up and connect to the side of the face over here. So notice his ears are not perfectly pointed. They're kind of a rounded point and they're sort of thinner at the bottom. So I'm just gonna curve mine around and it's gonna come up and just gently fall into the side of his face there. Now for the other ear, we're gonna just go to the other side. So it's sort of similar spot over here. Remember, these are not connecting, they're coming up a bit. And this one is just going to come to the side of the face, just real natural, bring it in. Now let's go ahead and add the inside part of the ears here. So I'm just gonna sort of follow this same path that I did. So I'm just sort of start up here and just drop it down so it looks like we can put a little bit of that pink inside. Same thing on the other side. Drop it in just like so. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and create Eeyore's little tuft of fur at the top. Okay, so remember, you can make this fuller, you can make this brighter. I'm going to zoom in just a little bit so you guys can see here. We are going to bring out some nice spiky tuft of fur or hair at the top. So I'm just going to bring out some little sharp guys here. Remember, keep them sort of different lengths. No perfection needed here, just bring out a little tuft of hair. Okay, now let's go ahead. We're gonna zoom out just a smidge and you guys are going to work on those bunny ears. So Remember, your ears can be straight up or they can be just like mine. We're gonna start with this first one on the left. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm just gonna kind of reach up and over. And if you want yours to be more straight up or more flopped over, go for it. Once I get up to the top here, again, I'm just kind of round that point out, round it out and just bring it down, just kind of make it feel and look like a bunny ear. If you have a little room showing in here, you can close that off. The second ear looks like it's flopped over a bit. So what I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to, again, we're going to reach up again, but this time instead of pointing it, we're going to just close it off straight and drop it down in here. Now let's go ahead and create this sort of triangular, soft, rounded triangular shape in here. Okay, that's going to look like it's actually folded and bent over. Okay, so from this point, let's do the inside of the ear. We're just going to mimic what we did, just a little bit smaller on the inside. There's the inside, same thing up here. Just bring it up and drop it down. That way you can see a little bit of the inside of the ear there. Okay, so now let's add some facial features to our Eeyore and make him look real. We're going to draw the first line coming all the way down, and it's really centered down, but as you can see, I start to come down and I start to sort of come over this way. It's just giving a little bit of curve to his sweet little face. So come up here, drop it down, curve it, and click right into the bottom. Okay, we're gonna zoom in just a little bit so you guys can see those features. The next thing we are going to do is we are going to create this arch all the way across here. That's gonna be his front area where this little mouth and muzzle and nose, his nostrils will be. So we're just going to do a nice arch, soft across there. Okay, now add in some little nostrils, just little tiny arches, like so. Okay, the next thing that we are going to do is we are going to create these little stitches going all the way down. Now I try to keep mine sort of staggered out so that they don't look perfect. We want him to look like a plush animal. Okay, little stitches going all the way down. Don't worry if you do more or you do less or they're bigger or they're smaller, it's totally fine. Okay, so let's create those eyes. You can see that my eyes are more oval shaped. So not only are they oval, but they're actually tilted just a little bit in. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create my first oval, and then I'll create the second one. It's fine if yours are bigger or smaller, you can play with it. This one is going to be turned as well, just a little bit. So that way they're kind of tilted in this way versus straight, but you're fine if yours are straight. All right, so the next thing that we are going to do is we're going to create those eyelids on him. He definitely needs those eyelids because he's sort of a mopey Joe. We're going to just do a little bit of an arch inside and a little bit of an arch inside. Okay, now let's drag out these little bags underneath his eyes. So I'm going to take this down here, curve it over here. Same thing on this side. Bring it down and curve it over here. So it looks kind of like the letter G, if you will. Now, his eyeballs are going to be over to the sides. Okay, so I'm going to connect it to the eyelid and again, do another oval inside there. Okay, same thing on this little guy. Connect it, oval right inside there. So he's already starting to come to life. Go ahead and create the eyebrows, and how you do that for your eyebrows is you are going to do a nice arch, up and down, and then you do a second one parallel to it. So we're gonna go up, and then this time it's gonna taper down so it connects into the point. Same thing over here, connects into the point, and then just close those off. Okay, now you have a really sweet little Eeyore face. He'll start to come to life once we add, the black inside there, and we'll do that in just a bit. Okay, so the next thing that we want to go ahead and do is we want to create the basket part before we create the rest of the body. So let's create a basket. Remember, your basket can be smaller, it can be bigger, it can be different color, it could just be like a pail or a bucket. Have fun with that, create whatever you like. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to just drop down one line and another line. So we're going to make sure it clicks so it looks like it's in his mouth. So click it to the side of his mouth. If it hits the ears a little bit, it's totally fine. Okay, so I'm going to drop one and figure out how big or tall do I want my basket to be. Remember, This will have some of a handle and the rest will be a basket area. So we're gonna go to the other side, drop it down. So it's sort of like a line, but just bent slightly. Okay, now close off your basket at the bottom. Okay, good. Now let's go ahead and create another line so that we have handles to our basket. So we're gonna drop, drop, drop all the way down, click. Same thing over here, try to keep it similar in size, but don't worry again about perfection, dropping it straight down. Now, before I start to add this line for my basket, I wanna create a bow, and everybody does bows differently, so have fun with that. I'll show you how I do mine. I start by bringing it over just a little bit, and I'm going to create what feels kind of like a rounded square or rectangle. Then I bring up what feels like a flower petal from this corner, up and feels like a flower petal, okay? Same thing on this side, up and flower petal. This one's a little bit longer, that's okay. If you have that, just kind of go back in. The next thing you'll do is you will bring out a line coming out here, a line coming out here, so it almost looks like a little butterfly, and connect, and connect. Now you can make your bows more round or more pointed, up to you. I always like to add those little lines right in here to make it look like it's got some pleats or a little pull to my ribbon. Now, I like to add those little tails to my ribbon. You don't have to, but it's just something I'll do. So I'll do a line right next to it, and then I'll do an upside down V. Same thing over here, a line, and an upside down V. I never worry if one of the tails is wider or longer or different than the other, because they never seem to ever end up the exact same anyway in real life. Okay, so now is when we can start to come all the way across with this line to really just make sure that everything is lined up. So we're gonna just go, how deep do I want my basket? I'm just gonna say, well, let's go right here. All the way across, jump over my bow and close. Okay, now you can create those lines. So if you want to keep your bucket plain, you could do that. Or if you want, you can create the lines just to give, you know, a little bit of a woven basket look. I never use a ruler or worry about the lines needing to be perfectly straight. I just put them in there. Nobody's looking for perfection or straight lines, trust me. Okay. All right, so we've got some of those. That looks realistic. Now you can add some Easter eggs. So for me personally, I like to make sure that my eggs are a little bit larger. When you start getting to where they're so tiny, it's harder to fill in all the little details. And so for me, I like to make sure that they're just a little bit larger than you think. So create what looks like the eggs are partially inside of your basket. Okay, so it's gonna look like they're just sort of tucked in a little bit. You want them to just sort of all be different shapes and, you know, directions that they're headed. You can even have one kind of poking behind the bow if you like. You can add some designs, like if you, for instance, want to do some diagonal lines, or you want to do some polka dots, or, you know, other little designs onto your egg, you could totally do that. Or you could just leave them and make some ombre eggs, something fun like that. Okay, so now we have sort of those details on our Easter eggs in our basket. The next thing that we're going to do is we are going to create his backside. This is super simple. It's just a line coming all the way down. I like to kind of keep mine nice and big because that makes his head look like it's sort of sulking, and his posture is kind of, you know, he's got his little head laying low. So I'm gonna come up to my ear, my little bunny ear, not my Eeyore ear, my bunny ear. I'm going to drop it down just like so. And I kind of try to let it land in the similar area that the basket is. So now I have this, and I want to create the tail. So for the tail, do a little circle for his nail, and then you're going to create 2 lines. 1, and you can keep it soft, 2, and close it off. Now, add another bow. Same thing we did over here. A rounded square, loops, drag this out, close it off. This time I did not add the tails. Now for the Eeyore tail, you're gonna go ahead and add what feels like a paintbrush. Up the hill and down, and close. Excuse me. Okay, next thing, add what feels like a back leg to Eeyore. Like that, very simple. Okay, let's go ahead and add a little bit of grass. I like to keep my grass very simple, just a few little lines coming up, different lengths. Okay, other side, just bring some little spurts of grass coming up. Okay, now are for the tulips. You could do any type of flower that you like, okay? You could do daffodils, you could do wildflowers, any colors that you prefer. So what I like to do for my tulips, and I'm gonna zoom in again for you guys, turn this over just a little, is we're going to start with the bulb. The bulb is going to be what feels rounded at the bottom and comes up to a point. Rounded, comes up to a soft little point. Now, I like to just bring in a few little soft lines here just to make it look like, you know, it hasn't opened and bloomed yet, but it's getting there. Then I like to bring the stem down. Now remember, the stems on tulips are very thin and they are flexible, okay? So make sure that they look graceful and soft. When you bring up those beautiful tulip leaves, let your wrist do the work for you, okay? Just let it kind of relax when you go. So when I come up, I'm just gonna kind of let it come up. And then you can sort of drop it down in here if you like. You can do a shorter one, like so. You can do multiple in one area, or you can just stick to the one on one side. And then the other side, I did 2. So you can kind of decide, you know, what you want to do with yours. I think I will do a couple more over here. I like to kind of keep mine going in different directions so they don't all look perfect, even different heights. And it's okay even if you have a little bit of a movement in here, so it looks like maybe one is starting to kind of open and bloom. A little bit of movement in here, same thing over this way. Remember, those stems can kind of shift so they don't have to be perfectly straight. Keep them nice and thin. See how this is curved, looks kind of bendy. You can have one of your leaves coming up this way, maybe another one over here. We're gonna let this one look like it's sort of bent over just a tiny bit. Have fun with this part. This is the part that gives you, you know, your authenticity. So have fun creating the styles that you like. All right, so now we've got a nice little sketch going of Eeyore and the tulips and the basket. You can add anything that you would like. If you want to add some butterflies, or, you know, maybe you want to add another little animal in there, or a rainbow. It's totally up to you. I decided to go ahead and add Happy Spring for my piece at the bottom, and it's almost like you could hear Eeyore's sweet little voice saying it, but you could do anything you want, or you could just leave it plain. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create in my own handwriting, Happy Spring. So we've just got simple, Happy, spring. All right. Now, the next thing that I like to do is I go ahead and I take my ultra fine Sharpie marker and I trace over everything that I just created in pencil. So you can see, for instance, on Heidi's, where she has gone over with her Sharpie, okay? So you can see she's gone in with her paint. She's still working on it, but you can see where she's gone over. So you guys can do that. I'll go ahead and work on mine. We'll do this together. Now, here's the other thing, is that you don't have to do the Sharpie marker. So for instance, if you say, you know, I think I want to create mine with the watercolors or the crayons or markers or whatever you're using. I think I want to do it without the Sharpieing, and that's totally fine. For me, I just felt like it looked a little bit more anime. when I filled in my paint, but I think everybody, you know, some people don't have all the time to do that, or some people, you know, just choose to do their own thing. So I'm going over everything that I just did in pencil. Okay, and it doesn't have to be the same exact steps since everything is already now done for you. You do want to kind of take your time and go nice and slow. The other thing is that you can absolutely use a regular normal size Sharpie. Those are considered fine tips, not ultra fine, and that's fine. It doesn't really matter. I just personally like these ultra fines, gives that real chiseled look, but you can do anything you want. And I literally do everything. So if you're like, well, do I do the hair? Yep. Do I do the eyes? Yes, you do. Okay, getting this guy in here. Don't forget to get those eyes. Go nice and slow. And don't forget that little sag under his eyes. Nice and slow. Don't forget the eyelids. Some of those little tiny details and features are very easy to forget when you're working. Okay, don't forget his eyebrows. And remember, those eyebrows don't need to be, you know, a perfect shape. They're donkey eyebrows, so they're gonna be sort of, you know, bushy and furry. Okay, so we've got this part. Do we do the ears, the bunny ears? Yes, we do. Come up, over, drop it down. Again, I really try to sort of take my time and go slow because remember Sharpie, you really can't do much about it. It's permanent, so if you mess up, you have to get creative and get flexible with something. You know, if you really, really mess up where it's just detrimental when you're really upset about it, you can always take a little bit of white acrylic paint and kind of go over it and let it dry before you start to paint. But for me, I just sort of say, you know what, it is what it is. Not everything's gonna be perfect. It's a sketch drawing. Bring it down. Don't forget the little nail. His tail. And his other bow. I did not, again, guys, I did not do the tails on the bow tail, if that makes sense. Closing. Create that nice paintbrush tail. Okay, we are done with Eeyore. Now we can work on the basket. And some people may say, hey, you know, I don't think I'm gonna do the sharpening on the basket. I just wanna do it like a brown wicker basket. You can do that, that's fine. And the other thing that I make sure that I do is that when I'm finished painting, you'll see that, you know, it starts to look a little bit dull because the paint will go over a lot of the sharpening that you've done. So remember, one thing you can always do is you can go over your Sharpie again later. Okay, so after it dries. Don't try to do it while it's still wet. A lot of people try to do Sharpie when their pieces are still wet, but just trust me, it just does not, Sharpie does not work on wet paper or wet paint, any of that. So just let it dry, and then when it's all finished the next day or that evening, another time, you can just go over with the Sharpie and just, you know, make it look all crisp. All right, I'm even going over all of my eggs. And again, don't forget you don't have to. It just, to me, it looks kind of that Disney anime feel. All right. Whew, now you're doing this twice, so your hand starts to get a little tired. Okay, bringing in a few of those little grass sprouts. Remember, you know, your pencil is really, you know, it just gives you kind of a guideline. Your paintbrush and your Sharpie, that's really what is doing the work for you. And the other thing that I try to do sometimes is if there's major pencil lines that you're like, oh gosh, I really kind of want to get these out of here before I start painting, you can erase them because the Sharpie is not going anywhere. Okay, try to get those little imperfect looking tulips. It's so much fun when you bring the paint on here after you're all finished because that's when it starts to come to life. Okay. The other thing too is that if you're feeling like nervous about these little tiny areas for your eyes or some of those, you know, areas that you have to fill in black, you have a Sharpie, you could fill it in right now, it's fine. It's kind of your choice. Some people really like to get those in with the Sharpie so they don't have to stress, and then other people say, you know what, no, I can do it with a tiny little paintbrush. Sometimes it depends on what you have on hand too. Okay, now I did not go over my Happy Spring and Sharpie. I left it as is because I kind of wanted to just be able to do it in paint. I don't really need to do it in Sharpie. So I'm gonna take any of these little spots where I feel like, okay, maybe my pencil's gonna show through. I'm not gonna worry too much about every little tiny spot, but definitely there's a few little areas here and there that I say, oh, I forgot this little spot. I better do that real quick. Okay, a few little areas. That's the beauty about pencil, is that you can erase it. But you want to make sure, when you do this, you have to make sure you brush off the eraser dust before you start painting. All right, don't want to forget this guy. This is his little hind leg that we want showing. All right, he looks super cute so far. Now remember, have fun with the colors you choose. You do not have to do the same colors as me at all. Okay, so we have our jar of water, right? We've got our brushes. I have some brushes in here of different sizes. And for watercolor paints, all you have to do is add water to your paint. Now, if you want a more vibrant, richer, saturated color, you are going to take that brush and you are going to swirl longer inside. We're gonna start with the inside of his muzzle area. So I'm gonna take this brush, it has water on it already, okay? And I'm gonna go into the color that I think. So I'm gonna start to swirl into my palette here. Now, if I want it to be a darker, more saturated color, you can swirl longer. If you want it to be lighter, dip into the water and add some more water to this. So the more water, the lighter it will be, and I'll show you. So I'm gonna go across here. This is a nice color. I feel like it really matches his original coloring well. So you can see the water in there. I'm gonna just dip a little bit more into my paint. I'm gonna start to drag it out. You can see how far this goes. And again, the more water that you add, the farther it's gonna go. It will get lighter, but it will go pretty far. Okay, I'm just gonna fill it in. And the nice thing about having that Sharpie is that it almost feels like a coloring book. Like one of those, adult detailed coloring books. So now I'm gonna go in with my paint a little bit more. I could have used a little bit larger brush, but this works too. Sometimes I'll find that I'm able to do an entire piece with just one brush or just two brushes. So you can see, here's a nice shade. Now, if you want to add any darker areas, like I did up here just a little bit for some shading, you can add a little bit more on top to give it a darker shaded look. You don't have to. Do some inside here. Let it sort of drag down naturally. You can make it darker, you can make it lighter. That's the beauty of it. All right, I'm taking my brush. I'm gonna take some of these brushes out. I have a few too many, so I can show you guys. All right, taking my brush that has the peach paint on it, and I'm going to take it into my jar. I'm going to swirl it around, get all that paint off, gently tap. Now I'm going to go into the next shade. The next shade for me is going to be the inside of the ears. So, gosh, there's so many colors to choose from. So I think I'm gonna mix a little bit of those colors because that's kind of fun. So I think I'm gonna do a little bit of this. Maybe I'll add a little bit of the soft pink to it as well. That's the fun part, is getting to sort of have fun trying these colors out. Okay, so let's start with the inside of the ear. That's a really pretty color. That's going to go beautifully with the blue shade. So maybe you want to add a little bit more pink. Maybe if I feel like, oh man, that's pretty fuchsia. So just start to add a little bit of pink on there. All right, dragging this in. I like that color. That's very vibrant and pops. Okay, go to this side. Same thing. Eeyore is such a fun character. He's kind of a downer sometimes, but how can you not love him? He's just so sweet. He's like a big puppy. Okay, now I've done both of the ears, the bunny ears. Now we'll do the inside of Eeyore's ears. And again, you can see on my first one, I made it a lot lighter pink. You can do that, and you can see that I definitely added more water to that one. So have fun figuring out what shade works for you. And the other thing is that you can try some of those shades on your paper towel or even on the back of your paper that you're working with to see what you like. Okay, So we've got our pink ears inside here, inside here. The other area that we want to do is to get Eeyore's little tail bow. His little bow is pink. You can, of course, change it. Okay. Put that in there. Personally, I love sort of that splotchy look, so some areas look, you know, a little bit darker, like even the inside of the bow, give it a little shading. Okay, I'm gonna rinse my brush again. Gently tap. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and go into my Eeyore body, okay? So I'm gonna switch over to just a little bit larger brush, not crazy large, but just enough where I have, you know, maybe a little bit more span on my brush. So I'm gonna use like something like that. Okay, so now I have to figure out the colors that I want for Eeyore. And this is where you have to kind of figure out which shade is the right shade. So this looks like a nice, beautiful indigo blue. I'm gonna make sure I add enough water in there so that it doesn't look super bright. I don't want him to look too dark personally. And you can see, look how gorgeous that is. That is a very large brush. I probably should have chosen a little bit smaller. All right. We're just gonna drag out some of that paint. I really love a splotchy look on some of these characters that look like they are stuffed animals, or even have a little bit of that old school vintage feel to it. I'm gonna go right into the tail. I'm gonna carefully go up to those pink ears, and I'm gonna switch my brush because I'm feeling like I want a little bit smaller one for some of those areas. Okay, so I'm gonna fill in those ears. Remember, make him darker if you want, and again, to make him darker, you're just gonna swirl a little bit longer into your paint. And keep in mind, it's perfectly fine when you have areas that are not, you know, it's not all one shade. It's nice to have kind of an area that's a little bit darker or a little bit lighter than the others. Remember, all of this in here is still Eeyore, including the inside above those eggs. It seems weird, but it is actually still Eeyore's body. And you don't want to forget that. Okay. Kind of keep your brush going in the same direction. You can see how I'm adding little bits more of paint here and there. It's always fun to see how these end up. Okay, I'm gonna carefully go into these little spots, carefully go up to my bow. I like to just really turn my brush if I need to and take my time. Okay, I'm gonna go inside my bow, my tail. All right, looking good so far. I'm gonna add a little bit more paint to my brush. Now remember, the ears on up here, up top, those are supposed to be bunny ears. So for me, I kept them white. You could do them brown. I mean, you could do them blue if you wanted, but it's supposed to kind of look like he's wearing one of those bunny headbands. So we're gonna continue on. We'll go inside the tufts. Drag it here, drag it down. Now this part, it can get a little tricky, but remember, you can go over some of these lines that we've already done. So for instance, you can go over this little saggy eye line. I try not to go over my actual eye. If you do, don't stress about it, don't worry about it. It's really not a big deal. Just let it dry before you go on to the other colors, the black and the white. So you can see I've now turned my brush and I'm carefully going into these little spots. Turning my brush so the bristles line up and they don't go over the colors that I've already painted. Again, you can go right over this line, but don't go into the eyeball if you can help it. Okay, now I'm going to go around the eye, up to the eyebrow. Don't stress out if you've gone over it. It's not a big deal. The color that you're using anyway is black, so not a big deal if you have to go over it again with black later. Turning my brush, going in here, this side. All right, fill all of these in. Turn my brush inside. All right, cool. That looks good to me. You can always kind of go back in and touch up areas that you feel like, man, I want this to be a little bit darker, or gosh, like I just feel like it needs to have a little bit more shading. You know, have fun with that. You can do that, like here. Adding just a little bit more blue. Go in here. Remember, let your paintbrush do the work. Turn on some music that inspires you or makes you feel good, or even like some of the Winnie the Pooh soundtracks are kind of fun just to get into the mood, or turn on some Disney music. Something that just sort of moves your soul, helps get your heart going and your soul going to paint. That's the whole point of painting, is that it's supposed to be fun, not stressful, not frustrating. You know, I look at the piece that my daughter did and I think it's one of my favorite pieces that she's ever done. I just love how unique it is to her. And I'll probably have that and hang that up forever. Okay, get into this little side ear over here, and then we do not want to forget the inside where the eggs are. So I might even go into just a tiny bit smaller brush as well, because I don't want to go into my eggs. So I switched over to a little bit smaller brush, and I'm just going to go right up to his little muzzle area. We're going to go down, drop it down. This is such a beautiful color. It's like a combination of indigo and cornflower and periwinkle. It's just stunning. It's one of my favorite colors. Go in here, carefully going up to my eggs. Okay, carefully go around my bow. And then you guys are going to start to decide what shades you're going to want to do for your eggs and your bow. Okay, so right now we've just finished the main parts of Eeyore. If you want, you can add more blues in certain areas if you're feeling like he needs a little bit more saturation, or if you're feeling like, oh, he's got a lot of blue, you can kind of thin it out with a little bit of water. You can always add a little bit of, you know, white in there if you want. I think he looks super cute and really authentic to Eeyore. Okay, so we're getting in here. All right, just any little fun touch-up areas. You can always go back in later too. I like him to look sort of splotchy. I think that makes him look realistic. Okay, so now we're gonna go ahead and I'm gonna leave the eyes for a little bit just because I want everything else that we've just worked on to dry a little bit. So what I'm gonna go do next is I'm gonna start working on my basket. So you guys can go in with any shades of browns that you like. I'm just going to grab sort of a small to medium brush, and I'm just gonna go ahead and dip into my water and figure out a couple different shades of brown. I don't stress too much about shades for the brown because I feel like wicker baskets, they just have so many different shades of brown in them anyway, so have fun kind of deciding what works for you. Maybe you want your basket to be white or pink or blue or mint or yellow, or maybe it's not a basket at all. Maybe it's just, you know, some sort of little pail of something. Okay, so what I like to do is I get some of these shades on here and I just kind of go opposites. So it looks like it's threaded through each other, kind of like a little bit of a weave. Again, don't worry if they're not lined up perfectly. Nobody's gonna notice that if they're not. So I'm just gonna keep jumping. Again, you can see I'm not too, you know, worried or stressed about trying to get them perfectly filled. I like that non-perfect rustic look. I'm gonna dip into my palette again for a different shade of brown. Again, have fun finding, you know, what works for you. Always, you know, if you feel like you have too much water or too much paint on your brush, just kind of dab it onto or tap it onto your paper towel. That will, you know, get some of that excess water off that you don't want. Okay, so sort of a nice warm browns in here. Just add them where you like. Try not to worry too much about perfection. You could tap in some more other areas. All right, so that looks kind of fun. I like that. All right, wiping my brush off. Now I'm gonna go back to my smaller brush that I was using before, and I'm going to decide what color bow. So I did yellow on my first piece, and I think I'm going to, I think I'm gonna switch it over to green today. So let's do a really pretty green. All right, we're gonna do a different shade for you guys today. That is awesome. Look at that color. It's like jungle green. Okay, it's kind of fun and unique. I mean, you guys can get super creative with your bows. You could do designs on them or polka dots, ombre. Okay, so while I have this green on my brush, I might add a little bit to one of my eggs. The eggs are the fun part because you can decorate them however you like. All right, so maybe I'll dip into some purples. Maybe we'll do some hot pink. Remember to always rinse your brush off well before you start going into other colors. Okay, I like that. Dip in. All right, let's see, we'll do another green, a little bit brighter shade of green. That's fun. Maybe we'll do a little bit over here. It's always fun to do like an ombre egg. So if you did some that were, you know, kind of bleeded into each other, that's also awesome. Okay, let's do a little bit of this shade over here. Just have fun. There's no right or wrong way to do this part at all. Blue down here. Okay. Let's do yellow. Get into those little polka dots. Okay, let's do a yellow egg. Fun. All right, last shade. Let's do like a fuchsia. Okay. All right, so now you've got your little eggs done, your bow is finished, your basket's finished. And now I'm gonna start to go into my tulips, and you guys can decide whatever shade you want. To me, red tulips are so happy and they're so springy. I'm just gonna pop into a nice, beautiful red shade. If you go outside of your lines a little bit, don't stress or worry about that. That's part of the beauty of watercolors. Go in here. You could even do an ombre tulip if you wanted. Okay. Now, really rinse that brush off well. And you can start to go into the different shades of green, okay? So I'm gonna start with maybe a real grassy green and go into that really thin stem. I'm gonna zoom in just a little bit for you guys to see. So you can see the shades of greens can be anything you want. Maybe I'll put a little bit of that shade first and we'll add another one. Go into your other tulip and it's leaves. I'm going to dip into another shade of green, just a little bit darker. You can see how beautiful that is. Isn't that neat? Get to watch those shades sort of transition into each other. Gives that really pretty ombre look. I'm going to go to the other side. And then what you can start to do is you can start to fill in the grass. Pull out just a little bit. I really love doing different shades of grass. I never try to keep everything one exact color. It gives a little bit more realistic look. And I'm just going right on top of my lines that I did. Okay, so it just kind of makes it all pop together. And I think that this gives it that real, you know, storybook feel. Makes it look like you're illustrating a book. Okay, poor Eeyore, he just looks kind of like a ghost right now. So I think that we need to give him some eyes. So I'm gonna take a really tiny brush. Now, this is the size brush that I'm gonna use, really tiny. So if you have already done it in your Sharpie, that's great. Do not worry if you're not using if you're using a Sharpie and not a paintbrush. It doesn't matter, you're just getting the job done. So there's a few areas that we need to do. One of the areas is this little tuft, and I'm gonna start with that first because it's up here Instead of me starting right at the eyes where we could smear it, we're gonna start up here. Be careful because your tulips are still probably wet. Now watercolors dry very fast if you've done it thin, but if it's a pretty large amount of water and paint, it takes a while for it to dry, so just be patient with it. And if you feel like, you know, when you're painting and you have it upright and you feel like it just keeps dripping, lay it flat. It doesn't need to be up on an easel. You know, some people love using easels and some people are just like, no thanks. So you figure out what works for you. You don't need to have an easel to paint at all. And you can stand and paint, you can sit and paint, you do what is best for you. Take breaks. If you need to come back to a piece after you've Sharpied it or work on it the next day, you do that because nothing needs to be done in one day. All right, I'm getting these little guys. I use that really nice, fine little brush. Okay, now the key for getting these small areas is to make sure that you don't have too much water on your brush. Okay, so I'm gonna carefully, slowly go into eyebrows. All right, don't worry too much if you go over a little bit. Okay. Dipping in, just barely dipping my brush to get the black on. Oh, there was an area that I forgot. We're gonna show you guys. This is a good example. Okay, so I'm filling in my black eyeballs, part of my eyes, and you can see he's already starting to come to life. That's the best part when you put those eyes in. All right, those look great. Can you guys see what I missed here? The eyelids. The eyelids are blue, okay? Now if you have them white, it's not a big deal, but I'm gonna go back in later and fill it in. The other area that you need to do is the little bit of the tail. I'm gonna zoom in just so you guys can see. Okay, going into the tail. Nice and slow. I've got a nice, thick, decent amount of paint on my brush and less water. Okay, so that looks good so far. All right, now I'm gonna take that same brush that was tiny to fix my eyelids. I'm gonna just really make sure there is no black on it. I'm gonna make sure that I don't have tons of paint or tons of water on my brush at this point to fix this because I don't want it to drip into the black. So we'll see what happens. So far, so good. So far, so good. All right, cool. All right, he's fixed. He looks awesome. I love it. He's really fun. Okay, now you guys are probably thinking, oh yes, you know, it's time to fill in the happy spring. Not yet. So first thing I do is I'm gonna fill in the bottom area. You guys can see that I did sort of 2 tones of green. You guys pick what you want. It does not need to be green. It could be anything you like. You could even leave it plain. I'm just gonna go ahead and take some of this. I like this bottom part to be sort of soft. If you do too dark of a color, which is fine, you could do it, it can almost sometimes take away from the piece that you just created and spent time doing. So you decide, you know, maybe you want it to be darker, maybe you want it to be lighter, maybe you know, want it to be brown. Or maybe you just want to accent it with other things on there, like, you know, flowers or butterflies or worms or bugs or whatever you like. That would be cute on there, ladybugs. Okay, so you can see again, you know, I'm trying to keep it light. We're gonna go all the way across. You notice that when I'm painting, I do up and down strokes, not swirling and all over. I try to keep it one direction. If you're going side to side, that's fine. Just keep it in that direction. Okay, so I'm going up and down. I'm gonna keep it up and down. You can see this is pretty wet because it's dripping quite a bit. Now you could go in with another shade of green, like I did on my first one. And you could also see that my paper is starting to curl a little bit, and that's because of the saturation of the water. Okay, now, it just gives sort of a fun, almost looks like a dyed Easter egg, doesn't it? Okay, cool. So I've got some happy spring going on in there. I'm gonna let that dry. I'm not gonna pop into yet with my happy spring and my, my colors. So now we're gonna go ahead and fill in the top area with my brush. Again, you can figure out what shade works for you. I just did a very, very subtle, soft blue. You guys pick what works, what you want. You know, you could do totally different. You could do a sunset, you could do sunshine and rainbows, I mean, anything. I just wanted mine super subtle and soft. Like it looked like it was white, but with tint of blue to it. Now I go real careful up to my tulips and my flowers because I don't want them to get dripped on. And just really soft, okay? Super soft in there. And then you're gonna probably want to use a smaller brush to get into some of those little areas. Some of it you can just sort of gently go into carefully with your brush and turn it. You can see how I'm turning it versus up. You can see this is super subtle. So it's blue, but just barely there. Barely blue. You can always add more. You could even add clouds if you want. Of course, you could add a gray rain cloud because that would be very appropriate for Eeyore. Okay. Fall. All right. Going into a few other little areas. The best part about watercolors is mixing shades. So when you find the beauty in watercolors of mixing those blues and those greens, you will just love it. It'll be your favorite medium. So have fun with that. Doesn't have to be just one color the whole way through. That's how we get ombre. All right. Again, keeping it real thin, going carefully up to my ears. And you guys notice that I did not fill in my ears white yet, and that's gonna be up to you. If you wanna fill in those ears with white paint, you can fill them in with white paint. I have white in my watercolor palette, and it's kind of up to you. Some people are like, well, the paper's already pretty white. I feel like I don't need to. I typically will always paint something white. If there's a feature on my piece and it's white, I will usually always use white paint, even if I have a white canvas or I have a white paper. Just, I feel like having something that's completely aligned with each other, having all of the same exact speed, so you've got all paint going. Okay, so it's very, very subtle that I have the blue background, but I do have the blue background. And again, you can make that darker or lighter if you choose. Okay, so again, I'm gonna kind of take my little tiny brush, make sure I have no black, no blue on there, and I'm going to dip into my white paint because I really want to get, oops, I still have a little bit of blue on there. We're gonna dip into the white, make sure it's nice and clean. Sometimes your white paint will get another shade of color on it and it will turn it whatever color's in there. Okay, so I'm just gonna carefully go into some of my white ear. And it's not a huge difference, but you know, once it's dry, you can tell that there's been white paint on there versus just the paper. All right, I'm gonna get my white paint in this guy. Slowly, carefully up to the black. All right, you can even, if you're brave, you can go into the little eye area, put in a little bit of white. Don't go crazy, use a tiny brush if you're doing that. All right, I think it looks awesome. Now, the last step would be to add in the happy spring down here. Now my piece feels pretty good. This area feels pretty dry. That's because I used pretty thin amount of paint. So I think that we should go in for our writing. So we're gonna go in. I'm not using my Sharpie marker. I am going to just use my brush. So you wanna make sure, again, you use a little brush that almost feels and looks like a little pen. Okay, so I'm just gonna go in. Never stress or worry about your lettering having to be perfectly lined up with your writing. And if you start on a piece and you feel like, oh my gosh, it's starting to get wet, it's starting to smear and drip, then wait. That means that your piece is not ready, it's not dry. And just wait till it dries, give it some time, and you can do it later. Okay? It will dry, but the last thing you want is to feel like you have to rush through, you know, your piece in the last little area and it's just dripping everywhere. And with black paint, it can be so frustrating because it can just mix and get everywhere. You can see I'm not using a lot of water because I don't want it to drip. And here's the other thing is you do not have to use black. You could use a completely different color. When you get up to some of these Ys, you can lift your paintbrush and go the other direction. All right, now I'm gonna get to the spring part. Go into my S, so I'll show you here. So if I'm gonna come up here and I'm gonna turn my brush and I'm gonna kind of hop off for a second, go back over and continue down. You can always meet halfway too, going the opposite direction. Okay, hop off, add a little bit more, and I'm gonna meet. So we're gonna go this way. And get that big S in, okay. Go ahead and pop into the last 5 letters. Some people are really into lettering now, and they have these beautiful fonts and calligraphy, but I'm just using some handwriting today. All right, go into your G, hop off, and meet. Okay, so now you have your finished piece. So you guys have fun, create whatever style you want. You can see my original sample piece is bigger. It has different areas, like the bottom area down here is brighter green, might have a brighter blue. Some of my tulips are. Don't stress about it having to look like mine. Have fun letting it be your piece. Again, like I said, after this is all dry, you can go back in with your Sharpie and you can just sort of fill in the features that you feel look a little dull, and it will really pop and make everything stand out. But I think he turned out great, and I hope you guys have so much fun doing this piece, and I'm excited to do a few more spring pieces and have a wonderful weekend. Thanks so much, guys.